Hello, I'm Stan Farmer, a partner here on the Expat team at Walker Condon Financial. And today we're going to talk about five main considerations that Americans should consider before moving to Portugal. This is a 2025 update because there's been a lot of changes going on in Portugal since I put out a similar video about 4 years ago. So here we go. Number one, that remains the same. Portugal is hot. And by that I mean Portugal remains a very popular expat destination, not just for Americans, but for expats all over Europe. In fact, recently in talking with some of my expat clients, I realized that there are just many Europeans that are taking advantage of the wonderful climate, the warm, welcoming people, low crime rates, affordable and quality health care. It's just a damn pleasant place to live, right? So, I'm sure that if you're watching this video, this has probably already occurred to you, but I have to emphasize, as a person who, myself lived in Portugal, 10 years ago, and my has it changed, but it remains just a very welcoming culture and a great place to live and work, or to live and kick back on the beach. Second reason, okay, and I used to talk about all of the tax incentives that led to the initial boom of Americans. Okay, back in 2009, Portugal made a concerted effort to attract wealthier foreigners to come and live in Portugal. A lot of those were income tax benefits that essentially meant that you wouldn't be taxed in Portugal for the first 10 years on non-Portuguese sourced income, okay, broadly. So that was kind of the big wake-up call for Americans. British people have called Portugal their second home for generations. Now, those largely disappeared at the end of 2023, those income tax incentives, by and large. But now I think that we've got to consider that, why are people still going to Portugal? And ease of immigration and a clear path to citizenship is a real driver for a lot of people, okay? A lot of Americans, find, an ancestor from a heritage of a certain country so they can get a visa to live there and then obtain citizenship, or just straight up obtain citizenship in a country, but it might not be a country where they want to live, okay? Portugal, as an alternative, gives you a relatively easy process, okay? The D2 visa is wildly popular. It has some very basic requirements. People can either work with an immigration consultant to help them, move the process through the hoops, or really there's enough information out there on the internet from immigration experts, of which I'm not, but there are many folks out there that help people along. But you can join chat groups and so on and kind of figure this out. I mean, you need to be over 18, you need to have a valid passport from a qualifying country, of which the U.S. is one. You need to have a clean criminal background, so keep it clean out there. You need to open a Portuguese bank account. You need to get a Portuguese tax ID. Here's a key one. You need to be able to show the Portuguese that you have an income, or that you have the financial means to financially support yourself while living in Portugal. And I think I've hit all of the requirements there. The process might take a few months. There is a bureaucracy and there's a demand for these visas. So it's not, push button, you're, QR code and you've got a visa. It's a little more complicated than that, but people can get through this process without losing all of their hair. Okay, if your objective, and by the way, you get the D2 visa and you live in Portugal for 5 years. If you are so inclined, you can apply for that Portuguese passport and Portuguese citizenship. Okay, that's a fairly short runway to be able to obtain citizenship as far as Europe goes. Now, you may be thinking, okay, well, what I really want is that visa. I want Schengen privileges. I want a country to give me a passport, and then I can move around Europe. I can live in any of these more difficult to get into by visa countries within the Schengen group of countries in Western Europe. Okay, so if you don't want to live somewhere basically full time, then Portugal also has the Golden Visa program. Okay, so this isn't quite the Donald Trump, $5 million Golden Visa. It's not quite that high an entry fee. This is a program, and it's existed for many years, that you either have to make a cultural contribution of at least 250,000 euros to some organization within the country that's been approved. You've got to provide that capital for Portugal to preserve their cultural heritage or whatnot, or you can make an investment that presumptively you get to keep to get back and maybe even make a profit on. And that investment entry fee is at least 500,000 euros. Okay, still need a clean criminal background, of course, but you don't have to live in Portugal full time. You have to be in Portugal annually. It's a question of weeks, not months. So if you like to hang out in Portugal on vacations and would like to, eventually get a European passport, this is one of the more popular golden visa programs on the planet. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that obtaining Portuguese citizenship for a U.S. expat is something that could potentially trigger more Portuguese income taxes than you might otherwise have as an American expat living in Portugal, because it would take away some of the favorable treaty provisions that were negotiated to keep certain U.S. income from being taxed in Portugal. Okay, so these are the type of pitfalls that we help Americans in Portugal and other countries where there are tax treaties that have similar language. We help them try to navigate and avoid the surprises, right? So, third reason why Portugal is so attractive, I think. Well, there's no wealth tax in Portugal, or at least not the traditional wealth tax that I'm talking about, where, at a certain level of net worth, you start having to pay a percentage of that net worth to the national government. This would be like akin to the wealth tax that exists in the various cantons of Switzerland. Another wealth tax that's technically part of the income tax would be the imputed gain on portfolio income in the Netherlands, or on the value of your real estate, right, that you would have in the Netherlands. Portugal doesn't have those, okay? However, there is the AIMI, which is the Adicional Imposto sobre Imóveis. Okay, so this is, in other words, an additional tax on your Portuguese home. But it's only for the very highest value homes. It's for individuals who own real property in Portugal valued at over 600,000 euros. And if you jointly own property as a couple, that means that the home's value would have to swell to over 1.2 million euros. Did you like the math I did there? 600,000 times 2 is 1.2 million before these taxes come into play. And the tax rate starts at 0.7% on an annualized basis on that property and goes as high as 1.5, which I believe is on properties valued at over 3 million euros. So at any rate, even most very well-to-do people can find beautiful homes, very opulent homes, below that 1.2 million euro price tag. It's the affordability of Portugal that attracts many expats in the first place. But if you want that coastal palatial place on the island of Madeira, or you want, that sea view in Cascais or Estoril in the Lisbon region, or maybe something very grandiose in the Algarve, and you just need to know that palace, may or may not come with a butler or valet that has worked for the ancestral home for years. You may get to keep that person at a reasonable salary because things are affordable in Portugal. Not sure about that, but I am sure that if you get over that 1.2 million euros, that you've got sort of a wealth tax to deal with. Otherwise, not so much. No wealth tax on your combined portfolio and pension and whatever real estate you have outside of Portugal, just on that home. Okay. Similarly attractive, no gift, estate, or inheritance taxes in Portugal. Okay, we call those, in the legal realm, we call those transfer taxes. And Portugal, as part of that movement years ago to attract wealthy foreigners, got rid of them. Okay, so this is lovely. You don't have to worry if you're a trust fund baby and, going to get mom and dad's wealth. You don't have to worry that Portugal's going to get their fingers on some of that dough coming your way. Also, just if you're very wealthy and you want to be able to, help your kids, leave them a legacy, you don't have to worry that Portugal is going to, tax your worldwide gifting or the inheritance that you leave for others. Okay, that is somewhat uncommon in Western Europe, okay? You can't say the same thing in many other countries, Netherlands, UK, France, Germany. These are big taxes, right? And the fact that Portugal doesn't have them is another reason why, France may be a tax-efficient place to live and not so much to die. Portugal, oddly enough, less tax-friendly to live in at this point than France, perhaps for an American, but much more tax-efficient to be generous or die there, right? Another caveat would be that there is stamp duty on Portuguese property when it is transferred to another. So your inheritees of that Portuguese real estate or any other assets that you have that are Portuguese sourced could be subject to a 10% stamp duty tax when it is transferred to the recipient. Okay? So finally, and this is another, kind of legal reform that Portugal did a long time ago, I believe back in 2015, and that is that trusts, which normally don't travel very well for Americans, okay, especially whenever they go to a civil law country, of which most of the continent of Europe is. Trusts don't travel very well because most countries don't recognize them in their legal culture and look upon them with suspicion. Portugal reformed their legal code in 2015 to recognize fiduciary structures. That would include most trusts as we know them. And through that parliamentary reform and through more recent court decisions, it becomes more and more apparent that maybe U.S. trust structures can travel there. Maybe having a regular grantor trust, which is a feature for most Americans to avoid the probate process, maybe that will also operate effectively in Portugal, right? And since there are no gift or inheritance taxes, that might also work in a trust instrument. Or if you're receiving an inheritance through trust, the fact that it just happens to be trust may not be the obstacle in Portugal that it would be in many of its neighboring Western European counterparts, right? So in a lot of countries, if you bequeath assets to your children, you get a reasonable exemption on the first few €100,000, for example. Okay, but in these other countries, if it's coming through a trust, the child exemption doesn't apply because the officials there or the judges there are going to say, well, this isn't coming from a parent to a child. It's coming from an unrelated party to this recipient because a trust is a separate legal entity. That's the whole point of a trust. All right, so that's, trying not to get too much in the weeds about that, but the runway is set forth through these reforms to allow estate planning with review, and this is important, you should still have your estate plan reviewed by a legal expert in your country of residence, even if it's Portugal, right? But the runway appears to be clearer for you to do the type of estate planning that is practical and effective in America and have it actually work as intended, to have the tax on the distributions from trusts operate similarly to the way that they would go off in the U.S., also in Portugal, and that's a real bonus. Okay? So here at Walker Condon, we work with many expats throughout Western Europe, throughout the world, but Portugal remains a country where we work with a lot of people. And we're always enthusiastic to talk to people who are in Portugal, and especially enthusiastic to talk with people who are considering a move to Portugal and helping them through financial planning and investment management avoid all of the pitfalls that they might otherwise incur. Make sure that they do it right. Make sure that their wealth is effectively positioned for a tax-efficient time abroad.